All right, Marla Boltman is the Executive Director of Friends of Canadian Media. Marla, thanks for joining the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, first of all, tell us about Friends of Canadian Media.
Oh, well, Friends of Canadian Media is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization that stands up for Canadian voices in Canadian media. And essentially, we are dedicated to protecting Canada's cultural sovereignty. And that task has been quite a challenge over the last several years, given the impact that the U.S. foreign services are having in this country, and also the challenges we are facing with people trying to tear down our national public broadcaster, the CBC.
All right, let's talk about, let's drill with the CBC. This story has got a lot of attention. The Liberal government refusing to say if it approved a bonus for the head of the of the CBC, Catherine Tate, of course. So we're not sure whether or not she's received a bonus or not. We do know that over $18 million in bonuses have been paid to about 1,200 employees, managers, and executives. The board of directors at CBC approves those. Catherine Tate's bonus would be, I guess, who makes that decision? The Liberal government, or who would make that decision?
I can't speak to who makes the decision about Ms. Tate's bonus, but I totally understand why this has, captured the attention of Canadians. In terms of, the CBC and how Canadians feel about it and the government's approval of these bonuses in general and Ms. Tate's, we're on the front lines of that. We hear it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And this situation, it definitely falls into the ugly. So, yeah, the optics are bad and the decision feels deeply out of touch. And I'm not here today to try to defend it. But, you mentioned the board, and the board has acknowledged the concern raised by Canadians and has thankfully committed to reviewing their practices. But really, we think that's like just the start. It's a good start, but it's just a start. Because I'm just going to say this. The real story here is not about the bonuses. It is not about the executive pay. The real story is that many people are just taking this opportunity to kick the CBC when it's down. And it's down because of decades of neglect from successive governments of all political stripes. So I just want to help get everybody here on the same page. In constant dollars, funding on a per capita basis for the CBC has not been this low since 1961. I was not alive in 1961. Mm-hmm. I wasn't even a glimmer in my parents' mind in 1961. Yeah. Yet the CBC is somehow expected to provide more programming, more languages on more platforms on 1961 level dollars. And so obviously when you say that out loud and you hear that out loud, the math doesn't add up. And it's a messy state of affairs, which plays right into the hands of all of these people who wanted to pick the CBC as ineffective and irrelevant and mismanaged. And that's how we end up with these conversations about bonuses. And really, it's kind of a vicious cycle, and it needs to end. And we feel very strongly that the only way it will end is if our elected officials get their hands dirty and they do the work that's required to reinvigorate the CBC after decades-long neglect. And so, right now, the current Heritage Minister, Minister St. Onge, has committed to tackling some of these issues. She put together an expert advisory panel to dive into these institutional problems that have been plaguing the CBC. And through this process, she'll look at, the CBC's mandate, the funding, the governance, management, and it's important work. It's long overdue work, and we're very thankful it's happening. And so we feel very strongly at Friends of Canadian Media that once we can help reinvigorate this institution so that it can effectively fulfill its mandate, things like bonus payments will not be front-page news stories anymore.
Well, okay, but I guess you say reinvigorate. At some point, the government can issue and reinvigorate or infuse more cash. But if the bureaucracy is too heavy, and clearly it's tone deaf right now, that's a real issue, is it not?
Well, I think like any large public institution, there's got to be some bureaucratic bloat. That's sort of undeniable. But that doesn't mean the CBC doesn't deliver value, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't provide an essential service. Studies have shown, and I think this is really important to your listeners, it's certainly important to our supporters, that countries with well-funded public broadcasters have stronger democracies. Well-funded. Again, let's go back to those 1961 dollars. That's not a well-funded public broadcaster. And, the democracy that I'm talking about is ensured in part by the CBC through credible news and journalism from a diversity of voices. And we have this rise in the internet and social media, which has lowered the cost for journalism, but it's also swung wide open the gates of disinformation and misinformation. And it's harder than ever for people to find credible and trusted news. Yet poll after poll after poll tells us that CBC is by far the most trusted source of news in Canada. And we also have to remember that CBC is one of the most important sources of news that delivers local news. It's the only broadcaster mandated to provide news to Canadians across the country, no matter where they live, in these local and rural communities. And, I'm a pleasure to be your guest and, on a Halifax show. I went to school in Halifax. I have very fond memories, but there's also some very bad memories from Hurricane Fiona when it knocked out most news stations off the air, but CBC was there. It created a light version of its broadcast so that residents could continue to receive critical information with limited internet access.
I'm going to interject there because we were on the air during Fiona, we were on the air during Dorian, and how do you know CBC was on the air and how long they were on the air during this event? I'm not trying to be argumentative, but why do you say CBC delivered that? Do you know that? Were they live on the air for how many hours? What do you know?
My understanding is that CBC created a light form of internet access because people did not have proper access to the full-scale internet, and that other private services were not able to provide that, and that helped Canadians keep Canadians connected during a very difficult time, as you know, and that they were doing this while other news stations were able to get back on their feet.
Well, I'm going to respectfully disagree with that. We provided live programming throughout that entire episode and did during Dorian and will continue to do so. So I'm going to disagree with you on that. Now, that's not the point of the conversation. I'm not against kicking anybody when they're down, in particular the CBC. But you're talking about needing more funding and needing more funding. Well, it seems to me that when they're getting rid of 500 journalist positions and they're handing out $18.4 million in bonuses, and there's a secretive nature to it, and we don't know how much the CEO is getting or if she's getting a bonus because they won't tell us. I don't know that is creating the environment that's going to persuade a lot of people to invest more money into this organization. That's my fundamental point, Marla. Any validity to that, or am I way off here?
No, I mean, I understand that people want transparency and they want accountability. If you look at the work that Friends of Canadian Media does, that's a through line for us. And it's no different with the CBC. It's a vital national public institution. The key word here being public. So that means the CBC belongs to all of us. We are the shareholders. But even in its neglected state, I would argue that at $33 per person per year, which is what the parliamentary appropriation is for CBC, that's a dime a day, and that's pretty good shareholder value to me. I understand that we're in the middle of a bad news story here, but we're in a bad news story because of what's been happening to the CBC. Why is it when 7 out of 10 people just turned in to watch the Olympics and everybody's talking about what a great job the CBC did on the Olympics, why is that not a front page news story? Because if it bleeds, it leads, and the CBC is bleeding, and that's what people want to talk about. So the detractors of the CBC are latching on to these transparency issues and these lack of accountability issues and turning them into front page news stories.
I don't know that's fair. I just honest categorically don't know that it's fair to just label anybody as a detractor and with somebody with an agenda because they have issues with the CEO of this organization not disclosing and us not being able to know whether or not she's received a bonus, and the board handing out, again, to be repetitive, over $18 million. To your point, in a time when dollars are tight, they could have hired a lot of people for $18 million. Could they not have?
I can't speak to how the CBC spends their money, and that's part of what the minister's mandate is all about. It's about looking at the management. It's about looking at the mandate and figuring out how in 2024 does CBC engage with the 2024 audience, and how does it give them what they want? That's what the mandate review is all about. And I think CBC is more than delivering on the journalism front. Obviously, it's terrible when journalists are laid off. I mean, this is the number one issues that we talk about all the time. And when you juxtapose that against bonuses, I understand how we're in this situation that we're in. But I think we have to look at the full picture here. And the full picture here is CBC is a pillar of democracy. Part of that comes through news, and it is chronically underfunded.
Okay, would we agree, though, that simply raising these concerns does not deserve the label of being some type of somebody with an agenda, because I don't have an agenda against the CBC. I've been a proponent to the opposite. I've been a strong proponent of the public broadcaster my entire career. So I don't think it's fair to say anybody who's raising these issues is some way aligned with some political leanings or whatever it might be. Can we agree on that or no?
I didn't say that. I said it is an opportunity for people to create another story to sort of kick the CBC when it's down. And again, like I said, label it as irrelevant, mismanaged by some people. There are other people, and many of them who are supporters, who obviously don't agree with the sort of defund the CBC message, who don't agree with that. And they also want to know about transparency and accountability. Like I said, we're hearing it all. So I think you fall into that camp. I certainly fall into that camp. And yes, we want more information. And part of that has to come through the minister's advisory panel. This is a perfect time for this to have happened because this now needs to be addressed. And the board has also acknowledged that it needs to be addressed. So I'm not saying it's not an issue, but I am saying we have to look at the bigger issue here, which is, a chronically funded broadcaster that the math doesn't add up to let it do what it's supposed to do. And that's why if you don't put money into your car and your car has problems and year after year after year, you don't take your car for maintenance and you don't fix your car is going to start to fail. And when your car starts to fail, it creates opportunities for people to say, well, why don't you just sell your car?
Yeah. And Marla, look, this is why I reached out to you so that I could have because I've talked back when it was Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, Ian Morrison. I don't know if you remember Ian, I'm sure you do, but that was the other iteration of your organization. And that's why I reached out to you, because I want to have the broader conversation. So I do appreciate you taking the time to do this, and we will call upon you again when the story evolves. Thank you.